Hello, 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 y'all. I am fortunate enough to be coming to you today with Mr. Costa. I'm not going to steal his thunder. Costa, who are you and what are you doing here today?
All right. So, from what I understand, we're talking about speakers in the context of TEDx. What's the name of the podcast?
Speaking to Expand podcast.
Speaking to Expand. Okay. So, I can give you background, but I'm here to share just a thoughtful perspective on what it means to take the stage, to share your story, or to share your perspective or idea on something, the value that can have in a personal way, and the value that can have to a business or to an impact or to a movement. I've seen it from a couple different places. I've been a speaker myself, had people speak on my stages as a TEDx organizer and in other contexts. Probably spent thousands of hours working in that context in events in various ways. So happy to share any insights I have for you. You got a place for us to start?
Yeah, so you were a TEDx organizer for how many years was it, and for which TEDx talk was it?
So I organized TEDx Gramercy. Gramercy is a neighborhood in New York City. And so I organized TEDx Gramercy 3 times. Somewhere in there, we did TEDx at the United Nations in New York, which was the first, which was a lot of fun. Except you should never organize an event or do anything at the United Nations. It is the world's largest bureaucracy. It's just impossible to get stuff done. We got stuff done surprisingly quickly, considering all that. So those were the different TEDx events. We've had up to 1,000 people in audience at any given event, and as small as like 100 or so. A first-time TEDx organizer is actually limited to 100, so you have to have quite an intimate event, which is cool, interesting in different ways.
I didn't know that.
That's the TEDx experience.
And so for you, it was what year did you start? Your first TEDx talk that you organized, what year was that?
2012.
Okay.
We did 2 that first year. We did the UN in 2013, and then we came back and did TEDx Gramercy in 2014. And the 2014 event was the big one. We had 1,000 people in the audience, which was cool.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. That's
Yeah, lots of fun.
for TEDx talks, what is the just off the top of your head, what's the average audience size look like normally in person?
A lot of the TEDx events are quite small, about 100 people. There are salon events that can be even smaller, 50, 60, 20.
Okay.
And then there are the big ones, thousands of people in the audience, hundreds of people
Hmm.
in the audience. TEDx, Western, Netherlands, there's some big ones all over the world, which is cool. It's a
Hmm.
huge community. We're talking about well over 100 countries, probably 130, 140
Hmm.
or more. There have been thousands of TEDx. I think there's 10 going on any given day or something like that. So it's a huge, super varied community of people from all walks of life.
Yeah, I didn't
It's a lot
realize
of
there's
fun.
10 TED talks a day, TEDx talks a day. That's
Something
really,
like that.
yeah.
Don't quote me on the stat, but it's like there's always a TEDx event happening somewhere. It's crazy.
And so for you back in 2012, if you could take me back to kind of where you were from your mindset perspective at that time to decide to take on what maybe at first didn't seem like a all that big of a challenge. Oh, I want to be a TEDx licensee. I want to host my own and organize my own TEDx talk. Where were you coming from at that point, and what kind of went into that decision? And then what did it end up actually looking like after you decided, and how were those two things
Yeah.
different?
I was a couple of years out of college. I was basically voluntold to organize an event. Like, we're
What's that?
doing this.
Voluntold. I've never heard that before.
Voluntold. It's like someone told you to volunteer to do it. Like
Ah,
someone told you to
okay.
do it, but they're not
Yeah.
paying you. So a blessing in the end. Not a huge deal. You end up spending a lot of hours. There's a lot to do. It's not event production isn't easy. There's a lot of things to do, and they all have to line up and come together at the end. The amount of time you're going to spend starts out quite small and then gets really, really big. You have to keep a lot of things organized in your head or on a whiteboard or on Asana or whatever tool you want to use. So it's an act of organization to pull an event together. That said, I was networking at the time and I like playing host, and the networking is way more powerful when you organize the event. And getting a TEDx license at that time wasn't crazy hard. There weren't a ton of people applying for them. Now it might be harder. I don't know. But there's a lot of these sort of event groups where you can just, apply, get a license, and organize an event. So yeah, that was all in place. I had spent 4 years at a nonprofit doing facilitation and training, so I was very comfortable in front of a room. That part was relatively easy. So it wasn't a huge deal, and it just leveled up my networking. I got a job immediately after that event from one of the speakers. Uh,
Hmm.
so for anyone who's younger, or it's anywhere in their career where they're looking to get connections, make changes. Super useful. Like go organize an event. And if you can apply to grab like a TEDx license or something like that, that's even better because the brand's already built. You don't have to build the reputation around the event that you're trying to do. It's like the brand is ready made. You're just applying, pulling the thing together, and inviting people to the event.
It's a good point. They put a lot of work into the branding and TEDx. Did you notice a difference in the TED branding as opposed to the TEDx branding when you were organizing it, or those kind of lockstep or very, very closely tied?
When I did it, it was early enough where TEDx was new and people still didn't really know the difference. So you actually play a video. The first thing you do is play a video that clarifies what is TEDx. And X is for independently organized. And so there are people who are borrowing, the TED letters. You can put these 3 letters up, and then you kind of got to follow the ethos. You put a big red dot on the stage. And so it is an independently organized event in the style of TED and TED Talks. The talks have to stick to the parameters. You film them all. You get them up on the YouTube channel. TED obviously has the right to reject some of this stuff if they don't want to put it up. They don't respect sort of the speaker who took stage or what they had to say. There is some quality control that they'll do. But for the most part, you're just borrowing their brand and running with it. Maybe now TED versus TEDx is big, but 99% or more of the TED events are TEDx events. I mean, most of the events are TEDx events by huge, huge margins. TED organizes a handful of events each year. TEDx does thousands.
Right. And for you, were you mentioned you're a speaker and an organizer. You had your experience as an organizer. Did those chronologically line up? Were you a speaker before an organizer, or did you organize the event first and then you became a speaker?
Yeah.
Where did those kind of line up?
Yeah, I mean, the longer version of this is as a teenager, my older friends thought it'd be funny to embarrass me in front of every girl I thought was cute. And so they'd like literally pick me up, carry me over, put me down, throw an arm around me, and then advertise me, which was embarrassing the first, I don't know, 30 times. And then after that, didn't really matter anymore. You sort of build you just get used to it. You're not embarrassed anymore. You just kind of talk to whoever you want, and you can be social because you're not embarrassed. And so that was a learned skill. I was an introvert, I guess, growing up, and then over time just became extroverted as a skill. Like it's a skill I have. I enjoy it. I get my energy from people now because I can. And so that was sort of the beginning. And then during college, I was part of a student organization, ISEC, for anyone who knows it. AIESEC is the acronym. It's a nonprofit organization that was founded after World War II on the basis of trying to do exchanges and rebuild cultural understanding across nations. And they had internship exchanges that happened between Germany and France in the 1940s, which is insane. Like these people were just trying to kill each other. And now they're doing internships in each other's countries. And so really cool organization, longstanding in over 100 countries. So I got involved in it. And there's a lot of conferences. There's a lot of training and facilitation and workshops. And the leadership transitions happen very quickly because it's college and it's 4 years. So I was like, joined the community. The following year, I took a leadership role. The year after that, I was local community president. And that's just how it goes because turnover is fast enough. And so you're forced to learn a lot really fast. And you go from running a 5-person team meeting, to running a conference session for 100 people, to running a local community that includes interns who are there from other countries, having a totally transformational cultural experience. So you end up in the care of a large number of people at a relatively young age. So for me, I just got super used to it very early on. One of the skills to call out, I don't know if this will come up later or not, but one of the skills to call out when you're up on a stage or in any context where you're leading a conversation with a group of people is listening. And nobody really calls it out because like, wait, you're the speaker, you're speaking. That's like, you have to listen too. Because in any kind of conversation with someone, if you can't listen to them, and here we're talking about body language, any kind of minor sounds they're making, the way they're looking, eye contact, something else, you can't tell if they're hearing you, understanding you. You've got nothing. And if you're doing a training workshop, for example, and you're giving a set of instructions and you need 35 people in the room to understand the instructions correctly, you're going to want confirmation that that's happened. So if you kind of got to do it with your eyes closed until the instructions, be like, everyone's okay, right? And like, you won't know if you're not listening to them. So the act of listening while you're up there is difficult to do and really, really important.
Can I ask a question about that? because that is super interesting. I've talked to many speakers now, many organizers, TEDx and organizers. You're the first one to concretely mention that. So that's super interesting. Is for the speaker that's on stage, if you could give a percentage as far as how much of their stage experience is speaking versus listening. Is it, oh, you're listening 5%, you're listening 20% of the time, 80% you're speaking, or maybe it's not the time, but maybe it's more the mental energy you're kind of diverting to that. How do you kind of go about making those decisions on stage?
Yeah, it depends how well prepared you are. It depends on the context. If we're talking about theater, for example, where people are performing a show to a script, this is probably less important. You'll hear people who perform talk about the energy of the crowd that night. And so they're still connected with their audience. Like if the room was empty, they would totally know the difference. So they're still connected, they're still absorbing from the room, but at the level of energy, at the level of enthusiasm and emotion, not necessarily at more detailed levels. If I am running a training workshop, it's not the me show. I'm not there to speak on anything in particular. I'm there to help get some information or some behavior change into people's minds. Training. I misspoke here. If I'm facilitating a workshop where people are doing work to accomplish a goal, sorry, not training. If I'm facilitating, it is mostly a listening activity. I'm giving a lot of my attention to, did the group understand the instructions right? Do they know what the next step is? Do they know the work they're supposed to do? And then they do all that and come back and we look at the work output. Go, okay, how do they feel about the work they've done? Do you feel like this is good enough or do you need more time on this activity before we go to the next one? So in facilitation or in hosting, for example, it's mostly listening. If you are the MC of a TEDx event, if you're up on stage and you're going to introduce the speakers, you're sort of vibing with the crowd, et cetera, if that's your role, again, mostly listening. One of the tips here is before you kick off an event, if you're hosting an event, before you kick off, shake hands and say hello and exchange some dialogue with 5 or 10 or 15, as many people as you can get to in the first 2 rows, 3 rows, a couple of people in the back, whatever you want to do, whoever you can engage with while you're on stage. Meet as many as possible. You're basically priming yourself and your audience a little bit for connection. So it takes time to connect with your audience. And if you've sort of pre-done it with a few people, you can shortcut that a lot. And the lesson here is from Neil, I forgot the guy's name. He's the poet who's hosted like 5 or 10 different TED events. And he's done like 5 TED Talks or whatever. I forget his name. Anywho, I was asking him for advice, and that was his, is meet people before the event. The advice I was asking was, hey, I went to a comedy show. So one of the people on Times Square sold me comedy tickets. It was like 3 for $10, whatever it was. And I found out later it's the same show in the same week, and you have to go in the same week. And so I took my girlfriend to one and my aunt to another, and I think I skipped the third. But in those 2 shows, most of the comedians were the same. It was the same act, like the same act. The comedian was practiced, man. This was the same thing. And first night was awesome. Second night, bomb. Now, maybe it's the same people in the audience. So like, because the tickets got sold that way or whatever. I don't think so, because the same was not true of others. So on one night, there was like a big immigrant crowd from like some Northern European country. And on the second night, there was a different crowd. But it was the same act, same delivery, same everything. Laughs one night, crickets the next one. It's like, how is that possible? The dude did everything the same. And it's like the audience matters. Like who's receiving it matters. What was the last comic like? Are they in a good mood right now? Or are they like, was the last one a downer? Like all of that matters. And so, oh man, I forget the dude's name. Anyway, the poet who has 5 TED Talks, I'll find it. He gave the advice of meet some of your people beforehand, like go shake hands, say hi to people. And if there's a joke or 2 or 3 that you can throw at that specific person while you're on stage to build rapport with one person in your audience, that will bleed off to others and you'll have rapport with your audience. So the tip there, if you're hosting, is meet some people in advance. So depending on the role you're doing, the amount of listening will be different. If you're giving a TED Talk, if you're the speaker and giving a talk, the amount of listening here, probably somewhere in the middle. You're probably more focused on the talk you're giving. If you're super well rehearsed, your brain will have space to listen to your audience. If you're not super well rehearsed, if you're super nervous about doing it the right way or any of those things, there'll just be less attention that you can give to listening, and that's okay. If you've ever heard preachers give a talk, or when Obama gave his winning election speech back in 2008 or whatever. When you get into the back and forth with the audience, I think Obama's was "Yes, we can," and there's audience, "Yes, we can," and they would sort of echo part of his line. When you get stuff like that, that's you listening and interacting with your audience. That's like when you really do this well, you actually have dialogue back and forth, which is cool. Yeah, sorry, long answer, but
That's good. That's why I wanted to dive into that, because that's very valuable what you mentioned, and I even personally took that away. When I go speak at this next event, I'm going to be talking to the audience members and building a relationship with them before ever being going on stage. I think that's really good to know.
And one other thing about how to do this is when you are speaking, try this, and it should work well for most people. Speak to specific people in your audience, and you can hop around. I mean, if you do the same person the whole time, they'll get a little creeped out, so you can hop around. But eye contact and speak to that specific person, and then jump to someone else, and then jump to someone else. That's a teacher trick, professors. I heard it from Jordan Peterson, but there are many who do that same thing. They speak to individuals in their classroom or audience, and they cycle back around or whatever. And the point there is that you can't actually speak to all those people simultaneously. You can't make eye contact with 100 people. You can only make eye contact with one. And so you do make eye contact with one, and then another, and then another. Try that on, see how it works for you. And that should engage the listening muscles, because now you're making eye contact. And where's my camera? Now you're making eye contact. And so you have to engage with it.
Do you notice people, meaning it connects, the speaker's message and what they're saying connects better with the audience? And I'm saying audience with a general term, meaning let's say you're talking to an audience of 100. The content of what you're saying connects better when you're talking to one person individually, because everyone in the audience is hearing you as if you're just talking to them, the one person. Like, let's say there's an audience of 100, every single 100 person will feel like the speaker's talking directly to them, even though they're talking directly to one person. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. My girlfriend organized a TEDx at Cape Canaveral last year, and she had a speaker prep sessions. And there was one of the speakers who this is just how this was her style. And her eyes were looking just over the audience members. So no eye contact, like 1 or 2 feet above. And that's where she was looking the whole time. And for her, that helped her memory. And so she was able to deliver the lines as practiced, looking just over. So that's the kind of feeling, right? Eyeballs up top. And it's almost like you're trying to remember. She was remembering her lines, doing a great job in delivering it, and it was good. And one of the other speakers was like, I couldn't listen. You weren't talking to me. This was something else. And he was saying this, he's also a speaker, right? So he was like, in order to listen, I had to go to podcast mode. Like, oh, it's a podcast. And he stopped worrying about eye contact, and then he started listening to her like she was a podcast. And for him, that was enough to be able to follow. But he struggled with not being able to, like he verbalized, I cannot hear you because you're clearly talking to somebody up there, and it's not us. So that's one example I could bring up. I have no hard data on like, does this make a real difference? I know personally I can vouch for it, and I have that one like anecdotal thing to lean on. But I don't think, like, she delivered a great talk. And if you look it up on video, like, I don't think you'd experience her talk too differently than the people who did, engage with audience members.
Sure.
So I don't know. It's a good question.
You having, organized the TEDx Gramercy for 7 years, and your girlfriend, how many has she organized now?
We did 3 events over 3 years.
Awesome.
4 years, something like that. So not quite 7. Kristen has done 1 so far, and she's hoping to do another one this year or next year.
Cool. What does the process look like for you as a TEDx organizer, from finding the person and the idea that delivers the TEDx talk to them actually being on stage? How do you guys go and you prep that idea with that person to deliver that idea and function as that almost channel or that river for the idea to flow through? How do you prep that person and that idea in that time between?
Yeah, so I'll have to think to remember this, because this is on a shelf in my mind somewhere, but we had a model for it. So there's understanding the idea, and TED is very much about an idea word spreading. So there has to be one idea there. If there's 2 or more, it starts to conflict. So step one is to understand what is the idea, and you can usually get it in one sentence. It's in the title of the TED Talk most often, or it's teased in the title, revealed in the talk. But there is an idea there. So figure out what that is. Usually that happens hopefully, and usually that happens very early. Sometimes that emerges later. You find someone who's got epic stories and a really interesting background, and like you have to dig to find what's the specific idea. Or sometimes you as the organizer are like, I know this is the idea and this is the person, and then just that's not the person's idea. Like they don't own that, and it takes them a while either to arrive there or to see the same thing slightly differently, or they find their own thing. So sometimes you see it, like for me, I found one that was to me a very vivid, like your story is from poverty to PhD, and like it's your success story about how do you get from here to here. And she didn't connect with that. That was my idea about what I thought you should share, which isn't helpful. So this can be challenging sometimes, but most often you can figure out what the idea is early on. If you have the idea and then you start to sort of listen to the way they're delivering that talk, you can start to figure out a structure. I like to not be too prescriptive and to allow people to have their own structure. And you end up with a lot of interesting talks that go in different directions, and they all look different, which is cool. There are also like template structures. Hero's journey is like the most common, most easy. There's one around environmental disaster and repair, and that one could very easily be the 3 things that tore this environment apart, the 3 things we're going to do to make it better, and why. Boom, boom. It's a V structure. You could typically draw the structure of the talk on a sheet of paper. And so what's the idea? And then what's the structure of the talk? And then you have to put all the pieces into that structure. Story, visual information breakdown, story, crescendo at the end, whatever the components are. And then there's, if you have the time and if people are spending the time, there's the polishing that you go through at the end. So after you have, what the idea is, you have the structure laid out, you've delivered it in that structure, accepted feedback about the structure set now, then you deliver and you deliver again and you start to polish it. And if you've delivered the talk 10 or 20 or 30 times, you've got it, it's polished, you could deliver it kind of to anyone. And what's nice is, so there's 2 different ways to do that. Some people write their TED Talk and then they try to memorize it. And that works for a lot of people, doesn't work for everybody. Other people invent it by speaking, which is cool. This is my style. What I will do is I will memorize my opening line, memorize my closing line, and then in between I have like 4 goalposts or 5 goalposts or something like that. That's what's written down. I could fit the whole thing on one Post-it note. So that's all that's written down. And then what I'll do is I will rehearse it in spoken word. I'll speak it out loud on a blank screen or to a friend or at a bar, or you can literally practice it everywhere, right? And for me, this is like any story I've told, like in middle school. You tell a story about what happened yesterday. Like you don't have to rehearse it. You were there. Like you're just telling a story about what happened. And so if that's how you think about your TED Talk, the story about this thing I'm an expert at, which is almost always you're always speaking about something you're an expert at if you're on a TED stage, then it's just you sharing about something that you're an expert in. There's no need to perform or do something that isn't you. Like you just do it in spoken word. So it should, and so that one's hard. A lot of speakers don't necessarily take too well to that, but when you do get it that way and you're like, oh, I'm just going to do this as if like I was at a bar and somebody asked me about like environmental restoration. Oh, well, you start here and it's about this, blah, blah, blah. And the experience we had here was X, Y, Z. And let me show you this thing on my phone. This is a visual and here's your ending. And like, that's it. It's the same way as if you were to tell it to a friend or a relative or someone at a bar.
How do you help the person decide between those 2? Like for me, my first one, they told me you have to write the script, and they helped me write the script, and then you memorize it. Mm-hmm. That one ended up being delivered full of mistakes, super, unpolished, super. Mm-hmm. After I got off stage, I thought, oh my gosh, that was
not your style.
Horrible. And then the next one, I did the framework, the kind of notepad kind of thing. I literally had like a notebook, wrote 4 different lines, but it came out so scripted, even though it wasn't scripted at all.
Yep.
It was
talking.
Like, so how do you help the TEDx speakers that have that idea decide which works best for them before the talk, so they don't have
Yeah.
to figure it out live on stage and realize they're too late to figure it
Yeah,
out.
you just do both and figure out which one works better for you. One of the little hacks we do is we insist that speakers show up to the first prep session or something like that, and then the last prep session, something like that. Like we make some requirements that are minimal, and people think, oh yeah, I can do that, cool, and then they show up to the first one, and we force them to listen to all the other speakers. So someone will be an overachiever and do a kick-ass job in that first one. And then what happens is everyone else goes, oh, hold up, I got to raise my bar. And so if you can get at least one, maybe two people who are doing an excellent job up front, it raises the bar for everyone else. And then they're ready to commit to doing the work. And if they're willing to do the work, then it's easy. It's try out scripting it, see how it goes. You know, what's your idea? Write it down, try again. You're going to have to spend time with them as an organizer on that. There are speaker coaches. We had one, she became a speaker coach as a result of doing all this TEDx work. She had originally a career in theater. She does awesome work. So you're going to have to spend time with them. But if you can get them to raise the bar on themselves early on, that's the sort of the big hack we've used.
And I cut you off before when you were about to mention something, then I asked that question. What was it you were going to mention?
I think I was just going to ask if I answered your question.
Oh yeah, you absolutely did. And do you have a message for, well, I'll ask you this question before I ask that one. How do you go about finding your TEDx speakers when you were an organizer? And what kind of methods did you realize found the best TEDx speakers with the best ideas for your TEDx stage?
Yeah. Sometimes they'll come to you. Some people who know they have a message to share will literally go out and try to get on a TEDx stage. The number of people who will ask you to do a TED Talk is astronomical. As soon as your email goes up on the TED website, you get 3 per week who want to do a TED Talk at your event. So hard to sift through all of the incoming stuff, but there could be some very valuable speakers. What's hard is a lot of people are really just trying to sell something. And so just understanding, wait, is this person just trying to sell something? Okay, great. Then okay, go sell your thing, but like TEDx isn't the stage where you necessarily want. So some will come to you. One of the things we did is sometimes we wanted a specific idea on the stage, so we went looking for it. I'm very passionate about the ocean, for example. I even got the little, I don't know where the thing is.
The scuba.
I'm a free diving.
Yeah,
I'm a free diving instructor. I teach people how to do breath hold diving.
Are you PADI certified?
FII, Free Diving Instructors International.
Cool, very cool.
I'm a level 1 instructor. Join the class on the weekend sometime. They're awesome. We dive here in Florida in the springs where there are manatees. So occasionally there are manatees jumping in the class. So I love the ocean. I went looking for an idea around plastic ocean pollution. And I found Jim Holm, Captain Homer, who's head of a charity that does awareness and innovation and other stuff around plastic ocean pollution. And so kind of recruited him into doing the role. And then there was a ton of work to turn this nonprofit director into a speaker. And so that was interesting and challenging. At the end, super valuable for him because it drew a lot of attention to their charity and really helped them make some connections. And he went on to do talks at a variety of conferences after that. Didn't know he had it in him or whatever, which is really cool. And he learned a new skill in his, like, how old was he? Yeah. Further along in his life, discovered he had a speaking career, and which was cool. So there are those stories. That takes much more effort. And then there's like just the networking. Like we want to do something on aging reversal or aging technology. And you can go network in that space and ask for potential speakers who's interesting, who has something interesting to share. We're looking for stuff that's really new or that's different than what's being shared so far. For example, Nir Barzilay spoke at our event. He's at the Einstein Institute, I think, and they do a bunch of research around aging. They study centurions. They study people who live into their hundreds and try and understand how the rest of us can be healthier or live longer. So different ways.
That's cool. And
we held auditions once. We took nobody from the audition, sadly. So that did not appear to work very well.
So I'm assuming you didn't do recruiting for all of how many total TEDx speakers has it been that you've brought onto your past TEDx stage?
6, 8, 14, and 7, 21. Not counting the United Nations, because that was like a full day event with a ton of speakers on its own. Not counting that one. In the 3 evening events, we did, I think, 21 different speakers. not counting performers. We also had a couple of performers.
Cool. So for which of those methods you as a TEDx organizer worked the best, the most efficient way for you to find those TEDx speakers that deliver the best TEDx talks? Was it the recruiting? Was it the application link? Was there a certain kind of marketing funnel, or I guess, marketing pathway to get that speaker there?
Yeah. If efficiency is your goal, I wouldn't do anything we did. If efficiency is the goal, I would go to TEDx speakers that are awesome, like that are already out there with like validated, interesting talks. And I would reach out to them and either ask for recommendations or ask if they have a follow-up. That would be a strategy I'd explore if efficiency is what you're looking for. What else? Because you kind of, if efficiency is what you're after, you want to look for people who are already speaking and are already doing a great job. So you just go to TEDx speakers and ask them. Now, their judgment isn't necessarily like razor sharp at this. So that might be a hole in that kind of a strategy. From what we did, the networking is what worked. It's also partly the incentives that drive this. So a TEDx event is volunteer organized and run. So the organizers aren't really getting much out of it. And so if you want it to not be slave labor, they have to get something. And so occasionally the organizers are going to invite someone who could potentially hire them, or they're going to use it in some way like that. Now, does that go against the brand? Yes. So like, can you really be doing that? No, you can't really have a sponsor on the stage. There's a bunch of places where these lines exist. So you have to dig in and try and understand which of these incentives are working. The beneficiaries of the TEDx events, like the economic beneficiaries, are the speakers. They did not have a huge audience before, and now they inherit a big audience. And if their idea sticks with the TEDx crowd, it kind of goes wild and they can grow their audience from there. So if the TEDx speakers are huge beneficiaries, but they're not allowed to pay, because if they pay, then there's a conflict of interest, which makes sense. And so it's hard to figure out which direction you send the incentive to. And so a lot of times networking is how it's going to happen, because it's a social credit kind of a thing. So someone who's organizing a TEDx event says, hey, I have a couple people to suggest as speakers to the team, goes and they bring them and suggest them. And those people, are the ones whose resumes get seen, for example. So you could dig around in the incentives and try and understand how those play out.
And for the aspiring speakers that are listening, for what you mentioned, I don't remember his name. He was the ocean plastics guy.
Jim Holm.
Jim. Yeah, Jim. So for him, he gave his TEDx talk, which he was able to leverage after giving the actual talk. Have you talked to him after he's given the talk to kind of pick his brain on how he actually did that for the TEDx speakers that are listening out there that want to turn their career into it?
So Jim reached out to us a few months after and get like nothing. He was like, I don't know that this was worth it. We didn't see a bump in donations. We didn't he was a bit sad. And then about a year later, year and a half, I don't remember how long it was. He was given a talk at like a local Tom's Shoes, in like the back of a Tom's Shoes in like downtown Manhattan. I was like, oh, let me go. And so I saw him and got to speak with him again, and it had picked up. Like there were a whole bunch of connections that got made. The TED Talk like basically made its rounds, and he was getting contacts from there. There was a prospective hire he was going to make at the charity based on that. He was invited to speak at some ocean conferences based on that, and donations did in fact come up. So like it took a while, which was surprising, because TEDx events, I wasn't expecting it to take time, but it did. It also helps in terms of like just when you Google someone's name, if there's a TED Talk, it just shows up pretty high up the list. Oh, they're a TED speaker, and it's kind of a badge. So it helps the resume along, or the Google results. So those are some ways. If you're, so you at the very beginning, you talked about like speakers trying to use this as something helpful in their business. If you give me a little more context there, I can.
So the aspiring speaker that they've given a TEDx talk, they want to speak on more stages. They figure, hey, I got this marketing asset of a TEDx talk, this social credibility, this badge, this stamp. How do I put it to good use?
Yeah, there's two different ways that speakers make money. The more common one is they speak for free or they get paid a little bit or whatever, and then they're ultimately making money on something else. So let's say, what's a good example of this? Let's say someone has an online class on solopreneurship. That's what they do. I teach and train solopreneurs. I myself am a solopreneur. That's my thing. This probably exists out there. That person could go get keynote talks and go to events and speak about this. And they wouldn't need to get paid a ton of money to speak about solopreneurship, because they could do all this and then say, if you feel like this is for you, we run a solopreneurship university class, et cetera, at the end of their talk. And there's a special deal for anybody who's in this audience, whatever the sort of promotion is. And then that would be how they sell their product. So they don't really need to get paid the keynote fees. But if they have, a podcast or two per week and a keynote once a month, that's their marketing for the year. That's $90,000. That's whatever that's more common. The other one is paid keynote speakers. You get paid $20,000, $30,000, $60,000 to give a talk, something like that. Almost always, this is someone who is already famous for something. They're the keynote speaker because they have a best-selling book, because they're the CEO of something that is well known, because XYZ. Almost always. Sometimes paid keynote speakers are getting paid because they have genuine expert knowledge. So there were some folks around social media in the early 2010s or late whatever, like at the early years of social media. And they just knew enough about that kind of marketing. And it was literally that knowledge that people were after. So I imagine some AI experts are getting some of that now. We have an AI conference, we need speakers, and they're literally paying to bring keynote speakers. For reference, if you are organizing a conference and it's $1,000 a ticket for people to attend, and you're getting like the lunch break, the coffee break for, I don't know, 700 people going to a conference, the coffee break costs, let's call it $5, $10 a head. So $10 on 700 people is $7,000 for the coffee break. So now if the speaker could take home 5K if they want to, like that's easy, cheaper than the coffee break. The speaker's more likely going to make 10, 15, 21, something like that. And that's at $10 for a coffee break. It could be much higher depending on whatever hotel you're running this at. Lunch is certainly $50 a head, right? So the speaker fees are a very small portion, typically, of what it costs to put together one of these events, unless you're getting a super high level, famous $250,000 keynote speaker.
I think
That's a little bit about the economics.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective for the speaker that's out there that doesn't really know how much to charge for their talk. Maybe in a few talks, I know I've talked to some more corporate speakers, and they talked about the concept of a seed stage, which, at least the way they described it, was kind of like Jim at the back of the store Tom's gig he did. It's like did it for no money, but made some connections that wanted him to speak on their stage, or knew someone who knew someone that they wanted to refer him to give a talk at their business or whatever it was. What would you say for those speakers out there is a good starting gig fee for them to charge, where it's not too much for the gig they're organizing or the gig that is being organized, but it's not so little that they're really undervaluing themselves because they don't really understand the industry? What is that kind of medium, nice price point that you notice?
Yeah, it's a good question. I wouldn't be confident in any answer I gave. General pricing psychology or pricing theory, you can price from cost, which you shouldn't do. You can price from cost, which says, okay, what's it going to cost me to do this? And you'd say, well, it's going to cost me a couple of days to really tailor my message to this particular audience. It's going to cost me a couple of days of rehearsal, and it's going to cost me a plane ticket, a hotel, or whatever. When you total that up, you give yourself a dollar per hour number, and you come out to $4,000 or $5,000. Let's say it's going to cost you $4,000 or $5,000 to really do an awesome job. You can then say, I'm going to charge 9,000, and take home, close to half. Or you say, I'm going to charge 15 because I want my margin to be 2/3. You could try to do something like that. You could also price from value, and you could say, well, what value are people getting from my talk? Now, this is tricky. because forces you to value your talk. Well, how much value is it worth? Like if someone listens to you, like, will they lose 20 pounds? Will they suddenly have all their relationship problems fixed? Who will they be able to make more money in their business? And it's like almost always the answer is no, not really. It's an hour-long keynote. Like it's not going to do it. It might inspire a little bit. So it does force you to come face to face with what is the value you're delivering. Can you put a dollar figure on it? And if it truly is amazing. For some of these headline speakers, the big ones, they can name that value. And they say, yeah, I know the value. I have a 400,000 person following online. If I tell my following that I'm speaking at this event, a few hundred of them could sign up. And so what's the ticket price? $1,000. 100 of them at $1,000. My value to this event is $100,000. So yeah, I'm taking a speaker's fee of 25K or 50K or 60K because they're pricing from value. This is the value I'm delivering. This is the tangible. Never mind what people get from the keynote. People are going to show up because I'm your lead speaker. And there are going to be people who can measure that in a more sophisticated way. I just don't know. But if you go live in that space, they have more sophisticated ways of knowing if my keynote speaker is so and so, I will have no problem selling these tickets. Like they'll have more sophisticated ways of knowing those things. So these things are measurable. And then you got to just like, what do you want to charge? Like, do you want to go charge $9,000 per keynote and try to do 10 keynotes in a year and call that 90K and that's what you're aiming for? Start there. Like, why start lower? Just start where you want to be. And do good work. Go to work, like rehearse, do a fantastic job for people who hire you. That's what building a brand is. You have to do incredible work for the people who choose to hire you, exceed expectations, make it incredible, be better than everyone else, and then build that reputation for yourself in the marketplace.
That, and I'll make this the last question before
Yeah.
you have anything you want to say. For the speakers out there that's aspiring, or a business owner, or the professional speaker, how important is personal branding, and how should they best go about that?
Yeah, if you're going to go out and be a speaker, it's the most important thing in your sales. Like the only thing that's second is your actual talk, or the only thing it's second to is your actual talk. So if you're giving a keynote, make sure that you're an expert in the field, you have something of value to share. That's number one. And then number two is your messaging and how you position yourself in the marketplace and how you communicate. So what's a good example of this? Alex Hormozy is a good example of this. So he does a keynote. Alex Hormozy, for those who don't know, is an entrepreneur. He got started doing gyms. He owned gyms, and then he had a gym launching program that he trained and made tens of millions of dollars helping other people launch gyms. He was quite good at it. He taught other people how to do it, made bank. From there, he started a supplement company. And so he went back to all those gym owners and was like, yeah, we have a supplement company here, sell these, you get a commission. And then the next thing I think they did was like a software company or a dental something. They did two other ones. And like at that point, it was just the skill, the business skill and some of the capital, and they nailed it. I say they because it's Tina's wife that partnered up. And so they've made a net worth of well over $100 million. Sales of, anyway, hugely successful entrepreneur. He does some business education. So he has a podcast, a bunch of other stuff. And so he's on stage delivering a keynote. And this one's on branding because his social media boomed. He went from 0 to like 6 million followers in a year or something like that. So totally ballooned. And so he got invited to speak at this branding conference on marketing and brand. And he goes, not really going to talk about brand. I'm going to talk about this other stuff. And then I'll talk about brand at the end. So he did all that or whatever. And he got to the end and he goes, all right, on brand, do something really amazing, then talk about it, then keep talking about it, then keep like he gave like a very simple framework on like how to brand. And it was right. It was like the right stuff. You looked at it and you're like, yeah, that's how you do branding online. Like that's how social media works. And he goes, okay, now imagine I had 10 followers on YouTube and I gave you this framework. Would you think, oh, it's a really good framework? That's the stuff you need to do. No, you would think you would ignore me. Who's that person? It doesn't matter. So he's basically giving credence to the point that like, if no matter how good the stuff is, people will check the credibility. So if Mike Tyson is talking about boxing, okay, highly credible, world champion. Like, okay, if I don't know, my uncle who's never boxed. It doesn't matter. He could be so read up and read everything about boxing, and he can spit it all out, but it doesn't matter because he's not Mike Tyson. Like the who's delivering the message matters. And so when Hormozy says like go out and do something amazing and then talk about it, it's like, yeah, the amazing part like is what works. So like, yeah, personal branding matters, but actually accomplishing something and doing hard work and being in the trenches for 10 years is like the whole thing. And then figuring out how to do the personal branding, like that part's relatively easy. You've already proven it. Like I've spent 10 years, for example, I've spent 10 years working with scientists on developing innovative research ideas. This is my career. I've worked at NASA, I've worked at the National Science Foundation. We've worked on the 10-year astrobiology roadmap, how to rethink the search for life beyond Earth, how to use AI to advance cancer therapies, all this stuff. And my job in the room is to help them think creatively to do better scientific research. I'm an expert at that. I have 10 years, 12 years now. Wow, that's crazy to say. Experience at this. And so, yeah, the branding's easy. I just tell you what I've done. And so this all goes back to product. It's all about product and everything else. If you invest heavily enough on product and the product is amazing, then the marketing just happens. Like people will just refer you business because it's awesome.
I love it. I appreciate the simplicity of that, right? Like a lot of people think, oh, it's so complicated. You kind of break
Sales is so hard. It's like,
Yeah.
what are you selling? Like chocolates.
Hmm.
How long have you been making chocolates? 30 days. It's like, okay, yeah, the sales is hard. You haven't this like, okay, yeah, I get it. Yeah.
So let's say I'm listening. I've gotten so much value from you. I realize you know some cool stuff about AI. Maybe I'm interested in learning more from you and following you.
Mhm.
Where can I find you?
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, so we're doing ChatGPT training like big time, which has been super valuable. We have actually a talk next week with an entrepreneur group. There's like 50 small business owners who are going to be in the room. We're going to train them all on ChatGPT, like how to use this to massively grow your small business. And so you can find that innovationbound.com/ChatGPT. You can find me at innovationbound.com/Costa. And that's our stuff.
Beauty. Is there any social medias that you use that you're most active on if someone wants to send you a direct message or something like that?
Yeah, I post a bunch of free diving stuff on Instagram. So on Instagram, I'm at ideas and action. Ideas is plural. Ideas. I can't spell ideas and action. And so there's a bunch of free dive stuff on Instagram.
Awesome.
If you send it out there.
Well,
Or
Coach,
email. Whatever.
beauty. Thank you for taking your valuable time to do
Hey,
this.
man.
And we'll hit the end recording link right here.
It's been a pleasure.